Alex, starting with you, um, it's my understanding that you were misdiagnosed at a young age, and it really wasn't until more recently than you were correctly diagnosed as to have a primary diagnosis of autism. Um, could you explain what your first diagnosis was and how you felt about that first diagnosis, how it affected your life when you were a student in middle or high school, and how it
Good evening.
affected?
Thank you. Um, First of all, long story short, I took me, oh God, 15 years to actually figure out exactly what happened with me. I was diagnosed with, oh God, um, it took me a while to get diagnosed with cerebral palsy, but before that, they gave me the MR diagnosis. And honestly, it took me a very long time to figure it out because I'm gonna be honest, most of my friends when I was growing up, they were telling me, Alex, what were you diagnosed with? But for security reasons, I didn't want to explain that because I didn't want them to use the information against me. But once I fully understand the situation, I kind of came to terms with it. But the way the information was given to me, I wasn't very happy with it. But when I found out about it, it was like, oh, now I understand myself better because it made me a better person for who I am. And and it was a struggle with me. I'm not gonna lie. It was a very, very difficult struggle for me to figure it out because I was afraid to tell my friends or my family or anybody I talked to unless they asked me to. But it was the most challenging part of my life.
Well, how was the diagnosis of, you said MR, meaning mental retardation, or these days it's hopefully called intellectual disability. But was it something that you felt, less than normal or made fun of? Or, I mean, how did you cope with that diagnosis? Or did you even feel necessary to cope with being a student, a young individual, when people asked you, you're about your
Honestly,
yes.
honestly, I didn't want to tell them because I wanted to protect myself. So I kind of kept it buried under the rug, so to speak. But eventually, I had to come out and tell them. The only one I told them exactly what was going on was my employer, and I honestly just kept it to myself. But honestly, when I first found out, when I looked at the paperwork, I was like, "Huh?" And when I was diagnosed, I was honestly offensive. Excuse me. I found it offensive, and it made me very, very angry and upset that they would say this to me. But my parents told me, "Oh, we just needed to say that for the benefits." But you know what? That's not the way we do things these days because people might misdiagnose you and they might take it the wrong way and they might say, "Oh," and believe me, I was made fun of in school with this information too. So that's why I buried it under the rug, so to speak. But after I found out about it, it took me like five five years after the diagnosis to finally open up with my friends and my family more, and they now understand. But I keep certain piece of information out for security reasons. So
And when you say for benefits, you mean for disability or social security benefits? Is that what you mean when you say benefit?
yes,
Okay. And now, I mean, since you have a new and different diagnosis of autism, are you on benefits or are you working so that you're not qualified for benefits because you're working?
I am qualified with benefits to work, but I was never diagnosed with autism. Just for the record, it was cerebral palsy.
Oh,
So,
cerebral
yeah.
palsy.
Yeah, a lot of people
Okay.
get that misinformed, but that's okay.
And cerebral palsy, how old were you when you had the diagnosis of,
I was actually, let's see, I was actually 15 or 16 years old when I found out about it. I'm 31 now, so it actually took me a while. I was like, yeah, it took me a long time to get the information out. But when I was on this journey, I wanted to fully, and when I talked to my parents about my journey, I wanted to say, I wanted to understand exactly what's going on because I don't want to leave most of the information in the dark. I kind of want to come out into the light, but I kind of want to, you know, when most people talk about their disability, they're uncomfortable. So sometimes, I don't know if anyone agrees, but some people sugarcoat the information, or they find another way of telling them without really telling them. But it took me a little while longer than everybody else to open up and express on my diagnosis.
How were you properly diagnosed finally?
Well, oh man, I don't even remember, but let me see if I can think. I actually went to the doctor, and they actually gave me the test results, and they said that I had CP, cerebral palsy. And I went to my last EEG scan when I was, I believe, 17 or 18 years old, junior, senior in high school. Yeah, around 17 or 18 years of age, I went to my last EEG scan, and that's when they told me. But then when I looked at the paperwork from my employer and they said what I had, I was like, wait a minute, this isn't right, because they still have the word MR in the paperwork. I'm like, no, 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 no. So I had to go back to my employer and tell him, hey, you got to remove that from the system because that's not right. So
okay. Edward, your situation is also sort of a common situation. You have, and please correct me if I'm not stating this correctly, you have a dual diagnosis. You're diagnosed with substance addiction, but you also have a mood disorder, I mean, including depression and anxiety, and it's comorbid, meaning they're both sort of waxing and waning and there at the same time. Now, you have worked for a few years doing what I would describe as working with the general public under supervision, manual labor, unskilled, maybe to some semi-skilled, both in the restaurant and other industries. Could you describe what it's been like for you having this dual diagnosis, and if you view, and you're in rehab now, is that correct?
I just graduated the program about a week ago. So,
Okay.
well, so your question is, how did my diagnosis affect my employment? Or
How did your diagnosis affect your life, including employment? And now that you've just graduated, what are your vocational plans and goals?
well, so my last job, I was working at Bolero as a porter, the bowling place. When I was working there, I was deep in my addiction. I was using a lot of heroin, a lot of Xanax, and because I was using both, the risk of overdosing is higher. And I actually overdosed my second time, and because of that overdose, I got cardiac arrest, kidney and liver failure, and I was put on dialysis at 19 years old, and I was found on my leg on the floor on my leg, so all the blood circulation was lost. And that caused my leg to swell up, and it made me very so much in pain, and I needed physical therapy. But I already missed a month of work, and right after I got back to work, I told my boss, maybe I can't work. I need some time off. But he said, you already missed a month of work. I need you to at least try, and if you can't do it, you can work as much, you can take as much breaks as you want. And after one day, I just couldn't do it, I was in too much pain. And I told my boss because of that, and he fired me because I missed too much work. And that was my last job.
Is that when you got into a rehab and recovery program?
No, I suffered for another 2 years of my addiction. I overdosed 4 more times after that, and I just wasn't learning my lesson until I got arrested 2 times in a matter of 30 days, and after that, being in jail for the first time, I just decided, maybe this is a sign. I need to stop. I've already almost lost my life. Either, in NA meetings, they say you're either gonna go to jails, institutions, or death, and I already touched all of them. And I decided that I needed to submit myself into residential treatment, and
So it wasn't court ordered or anything?
No.
It took a while, but you voluntarily
Yes.
made a decision that you needed to do this for yourself, to detox and then get into rehab. Is that right?
Yes, sir. Yeah.
And what, now that you said you graduated, what are your plans for working? You want to work?
Yes, I do. My vocational goal right now is to, sometime soon go to school, start working on my KDAC so I can help other addicts in their recovery. But as of right now, I'm waiting to start in a Caltrain. I actually started, I got that job offer from a friend I met in rehab, so yeah, pretty excited to start working.
When do you start?
I made the call yesterday, and he said he's going to tell his boss, and he said probably next week, probably in the next 7 days.
Sounds good. Okay, I want to thank you, Edward, and you, Alex, very much for sharing your stories with us. And hand over the microphone to Dr. Cohen, Aiko, and Michael in part 2 of today's seminar with
I need to get my clicker.
the clicker.
Teresa,
Okay.
can you grab it out of my purse right there and bring, it should be on top, the clicker? Oh, no, it's one of the, I'll be right back.
Okay.
Clicker.
While we're looking, there is another online question. What are you doing at the school level to create awareness or training the kids to be ready to get a job?
Have the whole screen up.
Hopefully, elementary, middle, and senior high school is part of the program is always looking forwards to being a productive member of society with vocational goals. Now, awareness is a big debate in terms of public awareness in the classroom for students with disabilities, and having the non-disabled students become aware. There is disagreement. That was actually our first seminar in elementary and secondary education. There was a lot of disagreement on using that as meaning elementary school as a place, the first place for public awareness. It's our opinion at People with Disabilities Foundation that it is a good place to share that with other students in elementary school. Unfortunately, there are others who don't agree
Steve,
with it. With that
The
concept.
Department of Rehabilitation is launching a brand-new program, Student Services, where they're going to be doing outreach to schools, community colleges, charter schools, universities, and one of Teresa, if you want to talk more about that, but basically that's what it is. It's a lot of money is going into that program to talk about awareness and to get kids working and give them the tools that they need so they don't have to become clients of the Department of Rehabilitation. And Teresa and her student services team is here, and one of them is Christy Adams is here, who's be launching that program in San Francisco.
Thank you. It does seem like there are a lot of kids who think their only realistic alternative is to get on benefits and spend their lives as a couch potato and collect a check. And unfortunately, that's just the status quo in too many places, and
Can I say something?
that needs a change.
If I may?
Yes.
I do want to encourage people with disabilities that if you want to get a job in life, excuse me, if anyone wants to get a job in life, to set your own goals. You know, despite me being disabled, you know, I was able to have a job working 3 years for my employer, and for me, it was a very good start because I want people to understand that people with disabilities can have a job. That doesn't make them say, oh, I can't, you know, just because I'm disabled, I can't be employed. No, that's wrong. You have to set your goals in your mind by saying that you can do it, that you can get a job, and you can do, as other member of society, be part of society rather than being standing out in the crowd, so to speak. So we want to encourage those people who want to get a job to, if you know somebody, if you have a friend who works in certain industries, ask them to give you a hand and see if they can get you through an opportunity to get that foot in the door, because once you're in, you're already in.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alex.
Good afternoon. It's really a pleasure to be here. Today I'm going to talk about diagnoses, risk and protective factors, and evidence-based interventions for transitional age youth with psychiatric and behavioral disabilities. We often talk about nature versus nurture, and the fact is that mental illnesses are inherited, but they're also caused by environmental factors. This slide reflects multiple studies regarding the range of inheritance for various major psychiatric disorders. And as you can see, there's a wide range for each of them, although some do tend to be more inherited than others, such as schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. The next 3 slides provide brief definitions of some of the disorders that affect transitional age youth and are listed solely for your reference. just move on. The next series of slides are from the National Comorbidity Survey Adolescent Supplement. Despite the fact this study was conducted in 2004, it continues to be the most referenced data on the prevalence of psychiatric, neurodevelopmental, and behavioral disorders among United States youth aged 13 through 18. Its relevance is not only based on its sample size of more than 10,000 individuals, but its design and implementation by many of the top psychiatric epidemiologists in the United States. The DSM-4 was an earlier version of the American Psychiatric Association's Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. It was updated to the DSM-4 TR, Transitional, in 2000, and most recently updated to the current DSM-5 in 2013. The changes involved with these revisions do not significantly affect the major diagnostic classes nor the specific diagnostic criteria for major disorders used in the NCSA supplement. This slide shows that almost 50% of the adolescents surveyed had a mental illness, and among this group, 22% had a serious mental illness. Among those with serious mental illness, mood disorders were the most frequent, followed by anxiety and behavior disorders. This slide shows the lifetime prevalence of various classes of disorders among the 49% who had any mental illness or disorder. The percentages add up to more than 100% because 40% of adolescents in this group had two classes of lifetime disorders. What's not reflected here is the percentage of people who had 3, 4, multiple disorders as well. Note the high percentage of those with two classes of lifetime disorders, which frequently we would describe as dual diagnosis, which is typically substance abuse or substance use disorder along with another psychiatric illness. This chart shows the estimated risk of various major diagnoses at age 18. In terms of age of onset and progression of mental illness, anxiety disorders occurred earliest, with a steep increase beginning in early childhood and leveling off after age 12. The risk was low for mood and behavior disorders until early adolescence when it increased steadily. Substance use disorders had the latest age of onset with a steep increase in incidence after age 15. The leading cause of death among U.S. adolescents are motor vehicle accidents, which drugs and alcohol are often a contributing factor. After accidents, suicide is the second leading cause of death among individuals aged 15 to 24 in the United States. Yet less than 40% of youth at risk for suicide ever receive treatment. Overall, there is an estimated 8 to 10-year delay between the onset of mental illness and the receipt of treatment. Given the high rates of suicide and the fact that 50% of all chronic lifetime cases of mental illness begin by age 14 and 75% by age 24, this is unacceptable. It is critical that we urgently prioritize and adequately fund routine diagnostic screening and proven treatments and interventions for youth. An important area of unmet need involves the education of foster caretakers regarding mental and other disabilities that may affect foster youth. Often abuse occurs because caretakers lack an understanding of underlying mental and developmental disabilities that may be the cause of disruptive behaviors. Youth who age out of foster care at age 18 are less likely to graduate from high school, attend college, and obtain stable employment. They are more likely to become homeless and lack access to the most basic health care. In contrast, youth who are able to remain in foster care beyond age 18 are more likely to obtain a high school diploma, attend college, increase their lifetime earnings, and achieve financial independence. The percentages of mental illness and severe mental illness are much higher for incarcerated youth compared with the NCSA supplement findings. 65 to 70% versus 49% for any mental illness, and 30% versus 22% for severe mental illness. The most common diagnoses for incarcerated boys are oppositional defiant disorder and conduct disorder, considered behavior disorders, often with the additional diagnosis of ADHD and/or alcohol dependence. The most common diagnosis for incarcerated girls is depression, often with additional diagnosis of oppositional defiant disorder and/or alcohol dependence. Research suggests that attention deficit hyperactivity disorder is 4 to 5 times more prevalent in correctional facilities than in schools. And an estimated 12% of incarcerated youth are diagnosed with intellectual disabilities. Involvement with juvenile justice and foster care represent risk factors. A risk factor is anything that increases the likelihood that a person will experience harm and a poor transition into adulthood. Other examples of risk factors include living in poverty, being a person of color, experiencing early single parenthood, living in unsafe home or community environments, and substance use. On the positive side, a protective factor is something that decreases the potential harmful effects of a risk factor and increases the likelihood that a person will experience a successful transition into adulthood. Most risk and protective factors are influenced by or involved environmental conditions. For example, a willingness to please adults listed under the individual protective factors here would likely be positively influenced by emotional support and physical safety provided by parents and adult mentors versus an unstable or an unsafe family environment. Another example might be the influence of positive and healthy friendships and shared activities with peers versus involvement with a street gang. So why are we focusing on employment? Among its many benefits, employment is considered a fundamental component of recovery and essential for a good quality of life. There are a number of evidence-based models and programs that promote employment among youth. Some have a primary focus on employment and others do not, yet they all share similar principles and practices. The Transition to Independence, or TIP model, is an evidence-based approach that supports early engagement with youth in multiple life domains, including education and employment, and promotes their successful transition into adulthood. Another proven program is Assertive Community Treatment, or ACT. A key component of ACT is its multidisciplinary approach that provides a comprehensive array of services tailored to the needs of each individual, including supported education and supported employment. ACT was initially developed for adults with severe and persistent mental illness and has now been adapted for transitional age youth and other populations. As with ACT, Individual Placement Support, or IPS, is a model of supported employment initially developed for adults with serious mental illness. Both have since been adapted for adolescents and young adults. A key component of the IPS model is its focus on a place and train versus a train and place approach. Studies have shown that individuals receiving IPS services are 2.4 times more likely to be employed than those who are not. The next series of slides outline essential features of successful vocational programs for transitional age youth, featuring guidelines developed by the National Collaborative on Workforce and Disability for Youth. An essential component are staff who maximize engagement with the youth whom they serve. Successful engagement requires that all staff develop and maintain a knowledge of community resources that youth need, a blend of knowledge of mental health and work development strategies, and a balance between the expertise and guidance adults can provide with the peer support and sense of empowerment youth provide each other. In today's world, young people are literally texting all the time. Many have created avatars through interactive sites and video games which have no basis in reality. It has become increasingly important that youth have a physical place where they can be real among their peers. Successful programs like Mental Health America of Los Angeles' Tay Academy provides youth centers. In places of their own, youth can engage in non-virtual communication and social interactions, which are critical for meaningful human development and interpersonal relationships. The most successful programs also have an anywhere, anytime treatment approach, where counseling and all other services can be integrated into daily activities that can range from hanging out in a cafe to playing pool. Successful programs also utilize assessment tools which focus on the strengths of the individual and which facilitate the development of effective person-centered service plans and good outcomes for youth. We would never consider hospitalizing a person without providing them a room with a bed. How then can we expect a young person to be successful and thrive without a safe and stable place to sleep and live? And finally, the most successful vocational programs involve a place and train approach, and perhaps most importantly, a primary commitment to give each young person a voice in their future and to support them at whatever stage they may be in the vocational process and their lives. Lastly, this quote is my final wish to each youth and young adult. Let their voices be heard and their spirits soar. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
My name's Aiko Matsumura, and I'm one of the program managers from Starlight Community Services. Starlight's a community-based agency that provides services, behavioral health and mental health services for children, adolescents, and transitional age youth. Most of our contracts come through the Santa Clara County Behavioral Health. To provide a snapshot, Starlight is actually part of a bigger company, STARS Behavioral Health Group, which was established 30 years ago. SBHG has program sites all over California, so we extend as south as Riverside County and move all the way up to Sacramento County. The program I'm here to talk about today is the Full Service Partnership Program. The FSP program has funding from the Mental Health Services Act, also known as Proposition 63, which was established in 2005. The purpose of the Mental Health Services Act was to connect children, families, and adults with disabling mental health illnesses. So when youth receive the FSP program and enter our program, they can have a variety of, it's a full service, so therapeutic services, case management services, psychiatry. They can get connected with a peer worker, a peer advocate, or a parent partner to provide support for not just the young person, but the whole family. I took a snapshot of the youth that we served that were coming into our program all of last year and into this spring, just to get an idea of where the referrals are coming from. So most of our youth, as you can see, are ages 16 to 18. In our county, a lot of our programs, the family and children programs, cap out at age 18. So it's really common for a lot of young persons coming at 16, 17, getting ready for adulthood, to be referred to the full service partnership program to kind of help them transition into adulthood. Each of our youth are required to meet a criteria for a DSM diagnosis. So having a mental health diagnosis is the focus of the treatment and how it affects them in their daily life functioning. So almost half of our youth have come in with a mood disorder. So that can be major depression, dysthymia, bipolar disorder, and then a good chunk of our youth have been impacted by psychosis-related ones, like schizophrenia, and, as mentioned in the video, PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. Now, while our youth will have a primary mental health diagnosis, they will also have secondary and some even tertiary diagnoses. So it's really common for our youth to have not just, let's say, depression, but they can have a co-occurring substance use disorder, or a third diagnosis of multiple mental health disorders, and then throwing in substances in there as well. At intake, all of our youth are screened for a variety of risk factors. So risk factors such as suicidality, self-harm, harm to others, violence, substances, and a history of trauma. So most of our youth that are coming into our FSP program have had exposure to a traumatic experience. And examples of trauma can be abuse, neglect, sexual assault, physical assault, community violence. So as the film talked about, not just experiencing it, but also could be having witnessed it. And because most of our youth have experiences with co-occurring issues such as trauma and substance use in addition to their mental health diagnosis, it was really important for us to get trained in a variety of evidence-based practices to target the complex issues that our youth are facing. So most of our team members are trained in models such as trauma-focused CBT, seeking safety, and motivational interviewing. In terms of referral, most of our referrals are coming in through the Santa Clara County's call center. So anyone can call into the call center and share about some of the challenges that they're having and get linked to the appropriate program that matches their needs. What we do have a lot of is mental health urgent care or level 1. And level 1 referrals are basically maybe if a youth is coming out of a psychiatric hospital, being discharged from urgent care, and needing immediate access to psychiatry for the medication management component. Another big source of referrals is really internally. So Starlight has a variety of family and children programs that are going from outpatient level, school-based program, and it's really common for youth that are getting closer to 18 to be stepped up because they have a higher need. Or we also have a wraparound program that actually caps out at 18. So oftentimes we'll see the wrap providers try to refer their youth into the FSP program, so it's a more smooth transition. There's a variety of factors that are related to one being eligible for a program. Really, the general idea is a youth has a mental health diagnosis that's affecting them in their daily life functioning. So whether it's in the home, community, in the school, because of the primary mental health issues, they're at risk of entering the juvenile justice system or entering a hospital. On the other end, it's about if a youth is aging out of the foster care program or completing probation, how do we support them to not regress? And that's why FSP is providing the intensive wraparound support to be able to support that transition. So our services are really inspired by the transition to independent process model that Janice spoke to. The model really focuses on how do we partner with the young person to engage in identifying their strengths, what are their interests, what do you feel like is the main priority for you in your treatment, whether it's getting employment or finishing school or moving out on your own. Really, it's guided by the young person, and then we figure out how can the team support you with creating actionable steps. So breaking it down to be more appeasable. And then the team supports with all the steps along the way of, if a young person wants to get a job, we can help with building a resume. We can help with prepping for a job interview. Once they get the job, we can help them with role-playing on certain conflict resolution issues or things that are going to get in the way of them keeping their employment. So most of our youth coming in either have an educational goal that's connected to future employment or an employment goal. So for the educational goals, most of our youth are on track. So not everyone was in their senior year, let's say, of high school or their senior year of college, so they haven't met the goals yet of getting the diploma. However, most of them are on track. And for the youth that have a goal of acquiring part-time employment or full-time employment, they've mostly been successful, which is a great sign of outcomes. Common barriers that we've found to youth either getting employment or maintaining employment are listed above. So for instance, for substance use, if a youth is using substances actively, whether to self-medicate, whether it's for recreational, some places will do drug testing, and that could be a potential barrier. On the other end, like Edward was able to share, when sometimes a youth is using substances, it's really affecting them in other areas of their life, so it might get in the way of them keeping a position. Other examples include legal problems. So a lot of our youth are on juvenile probation. So they might have certain crimes on their records that might not be, make them eligible for certain positions out in the community. Our program has flex funds through the Mental Health Services Act, which can help with targeting a lot of these barriers. So for instance, if a youth has challenges with transportation, we can purchase a bus pass for the young person. If youth is struggling with getting their GPA up to be able to get a worker's permit to get the job, what we do is say, hey, let's link you up with a tutor. We know a tutor that has experience working with youth. Let's tackle that barrier one step at a time. I think the more difficult challenges has been, as Janice mentioned, the negative peer influences. So a lot of our youth are affected by the gang culture, and trying to kind of tackle more legal ways of getting employment could be maybe not as big of a motivator. And so depending on who the youth surrounds himself by, having positive adults that expect age-appropriate, healthy employment goals, that could be an important piece to focus on. So on the other end, things that we've seen that have really supported our youth with getting employment. When a young person has confidence in themselves, is optimistic about getting employment, and is motivated to follow through on those tasks, we all know there's like 100 steps that are required to get a job and to keep a job. So the youth that are able to kind of develop those skills and use the team for support in addressing those skills or enhancing those skills have been more successful. So in addition to the TIP model, we incorporate 2 other models that were introduced to us in the last 5+ years, I would say, through our county. Transformational care planning, we also call it TCP, is a model that focuses on building on the young person's strengths, helping them collaborate with their providers, and build a treatment plan that meets their needs. That goes really hand in hand with a TIP model about engagement and tailoring services so they can guide the treatment. Another piece is, as we talked about, the significant impact of trauma and understanding what does it look like in the sessions? What does it look like as the young person in developing relationships, being triggered in the workforce? So being mindful of how trauma interacts and presents with all of our youth and affects their path to recovery is a huge piece that we're constantly having discussions about. And I wanted to end a little bit on the 7 guidelines. So the TIP model does have 7 guidelines. So we already talked about the piece about engagement and working with a young person, prevention planning on risky situations or behaviors that could get in the way of them getting employment. It's also really important for us to tailor services so they're accessible. We are technically a 24/7 contract, so our youth have access to us to be able to target some of their triggers and stressors that could get in the way of their employment. Helping the young person understand the consequences of their actions. So yes, we want to set up our youth to succeed. However, we also want to give them the chance to feel some of the natural consequences so they can learn from decision making how they have a big role in their success. Tying in key players is huge. So we wrap around not just with the youth, but with the whole family. So if there's a family member that can be a supportive asset to the young person, if there's a teacher or a coach or a music instructor, anyone out in the community that can support and create a safety net for this young person, we're always trying to encourage that. Also being mindful of what are the age-appropriate adult skills, decision-making, self-management, communication, conflict resolution, all these things that are associated with becoming an adult, we're trying to equip our young persons with. And then, of course, being mindful of the outcomes. Are our young persons being successful with the interventions that we're implementing? We have to hold ourselves responsible to support the young person, not just on an individual level, but on a programmatic level. And then involving the youth in the TIP system. So having positions such as peer mentors, peer advocates, having them part of the program is an important piece about providing peer support for our youth. And that's just it. That's my contact information if you have any other questions, and feel free to use the references. Question.
So I'd like to know how this program is funded.
So through Mental Health Services Act, so we have a contract through Santa Clara County Behavioral Health. So they provide contracts to varying providers, and so we go up for bid.
Okay, so if somebody self-refers to your program, what would be the process?
They can call the call center, or they can reach out. They have to have full scope Medi-Cal or no insurance, which is funded by the Mental Health Services Act.
So it's only Medi-Cal or no insurance?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And full scope, would you explain what that is?
So not just like partial coverage, but covering all of mental health services.
And covering dental and full scope is that all aspects of healthcare are covered, whereas there are some Medi-Cal programs that only cover, say, mental health or physical health or a portion, but it's not considered full scope. It's a special category of Medi-Cal.
Is wraparound a term that's still used today? Okay.
I had another question too. Where do you refer people once they age out of your program? Where do they go?
They can, so most of the time they're able to meet their goals and graduate much sooner than 25. We've had some youth where we can support their transition to the adult programs. So there's also an adult FSP program and an adult outpatient program.
And what was the first thing, an adult what?
Oh, sorry, an adult FSP. So this FSP program targets transitional age youth, and then there's also an adult version.
Okay, thanks.
That woman in the back has a question.
Hi, I live in Santa Clara County. I'm curious, the Santa Clara Valley Health Plan, are you covered under them?
No, we are not.
Because that's a Medi-Cal, and most of the people in Medi-Cal go under that HMO, so interesting. Okay, next question. If they meet the criteria as for services, like a lot, they're at risk of juvenile hall or whatever it is, but they happen to be a regional center client, and they happen to have both mental health and maybe autism, can they access your program?
We've actually had youth that have both a connection with SARC as well as our program. As long as our focus is on the mental health piece, which is really hard to delineate, right? Because a lot of it's just so co-occurring. We can collaborate with the other provider.
Will SARC fund it?
So no, it would not be SARC funding the FSP program.
Okay, so it's one or the other. This brings up a big problem, in terms of silos,
Yeah.
putting people into, you either have a mental health problem or you have autism.
Yes.
And then you go to the autism employment programs and they say, oh, they're too behaviorally challenged to enter our program. We cannot accept them. And then you have people fall in the cracks. So I'm just making a comment.
I didn't address this in the diagnostic categories, but one of the big problems with just the definition of a behavior disorder is that a behavior is not a diagnosis. And we talk about conduct disorder and oppositional defiant disorder. Many clinicians, including myself, do not believe those should be categorized as diagnoses because they represent behaviors as opposed to something we see as being a brain disease. And they cannot necessarily even be linked. And as it is, we don't have any markers, any physical markers for any of the mental illnesses that are categorized in the DSM anyway. So in that regard, I think that it is a big problem, and it's also a problem in trying to hospitalize someone from a regional center for a psychiatric disorder. They are turned away because they supposedly have a behavior disorder and they don't have a mental illness. So it's been used to, as you're saying, to basically defer and deter people from getting admission to hospitals and other services.
And just what I'd like to hear from the panel, if there are any programs that serve behaviorally challenged, normal IQ adults with autism. So far, I've not been able to find them. So if anybody has any ideas, let me know.
Camilla?
Are these services here in San Francisco only?
So the program that I'm speaking about is for Santa Clara County.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Again, my name is Michael Schocket with Caminar, and Caminar is headquartered in San Mateo County, and we recently acquired Family Children's Services of Santa Clara County, and Healthy Partnerships in Solano County, and just recently Project 90 in San Mateo County. And these programs work with folks with substance abuse and alcohol problems. Caminar runs a wide array of programs in San Mateo County, Solano County, Butte County, and here in San Francisco and Santa Clara County. And Jobs Plus is the vocational arm of Caminar, and we've been doing this for 26 years. And it all started when I was running a residential program called Eucalyptus House in 1990, and we were working with Napa State Hospital, and they discharged about 5 youth to our program, ranging in age from 18 to 20, and it almost took the house down. You can imagine all of the stuff that was going on in this residential program, from alcohol to drugs and everything else in between. And I decided we've got some connections with the city council, Daly City Council, and I took these youth and we set up lunches, made lunches, and delivered it to Daly City Council meetings. And it was amazing what I saw. These young folks weren't acting out. They weren't clients, they weren't patients, they were engaged and they wanted to work. And from there, we started our Jobs Plus program with startup money or an establishment grant from the Department of Rehabilitation, and the rest is more or less history. Basically, our age group, as you can see, is 18 to 24 and 25 on up. But what's interesting is I've been with this agency and doing this work for 38 years. And of the age group, there are a handful of folks now that I've also known since they were 18 years old, that have gone through the program, that have gone to work, that have gotten housing, that have made friends, that have gotten married. And it's unbelievable to see that. The ages that we serve and the diagnoses are similar to the other programs that were talked about this afternoon. And there are, again, the diagnosis is also co-occurring with a lot of substance abuse on top of the mental health issues and just a lot of stuff that's going on with these young folks. And the idea is not so much, in my opinion, is to focus on the diagnosis, but to focus on the person's ability to go to work and to establish a relationship with their employment specialist so they can become successful. So these are some of our caseloads, and when you see what's referred to as someone that's been closed successfully, that's somebody that's been working for 3 months or more. Since we work with the Department of Rehabilitation, Usually after 3, 4, 5 months, when a person is doing well, they're closed successfully. And these are some of the jobs that we place folks in at Caminar Jobs Plus. We have 3 employment specialists here in San Francisco that work with folks and meet them where they're at. And a lot of these jobs may seem entry level, but when you're working with somebody that's young, it's their first job. And what's interesting is, as we all know, youth go through many, many different jobs, whether you have a barrier to employment or not. Everybody here at one point when you were 16, 17, or 18 certainly didn't make a career out of Blockbuster Video. You moved on and went from job to job. And with our youth, we try and place them in jobs that are a little bit hip, whether it be a gaming store or Abercrombie or American Eagle, in an environment where they're working with their peers and to develop relationships and to start their new life. So there's a variety of backgrounds where people come from, as you can see up above. And the saddest part is I remember going to one of the temporary foster homes in San Mateo County. I took a tour there, and it's just amazing when you hear the stories of these kids and their upbringing and the struggles that they had. And I remember after that tour, we were able to get 2 referrals from the program and put these people to work, and it's just mind-blowing the changes that you see. So the referrals come from the 5 different clinics in San Mateo County, as well as Kaiser Permanente, but Caminar Jobs Plus is a vendor with the State of California Department of Rehabilitation. So they more or less hire us to place their clients, but we do all the navigation to help somebody fill out the paperwork for the Department of Rehabilitation and to get them open with us. And here in San Francisco, we're part of a cooperative program. We're in partnerships with 4 other agencies to provide vocational and employment services. And some of the services that we provide are certainly skill assessments. So if a young person isn't quite sure what they want to do, we'll put them in what's called an assessment or a sample work trial, maybe at Whole Foods or at Factory to You, where they can try out a job over a 40-hour period over 2 weeks and see where they're at. And then after that, a report is written, and if they want to go on to more serious employment, that's what we do. And then the key element to success, what was talked about earlier, is job coaching. And that's really key. And you may ask, well, why would an 18-year-old want somebody hanging around with them at a job site? And the key is not to have the coach do the job for them, but to support them. And our job coaches are like caterers. You go to a party, there's always food at the table, but rarely do you see the caterer. And it's the same thing that we try and do with a job coach, is make them invisible, but to be able to provide the support they need to help them get through their 90-day probation. And one of the evidence-based practices that's talked about a lot is IPS, and that's a rapid job placement. So you strike the fire while it's hot and try to eliminate all the red tape to get somebody open and stop talking about pre-vocational stuff and going to many job clubs. But when a young person wants to go to work, that's the whole idea of IPS, is to get them working as quickly as possible, and then we'll address whatever areas are needed. So how do we know that employment works? Well, all the stats are up there. And you also know that it works when you get testimonials from young folks that reach out and spread the word about how it's changed their lives, and that's really the bottom line, is hearing it from the source and hearing it from these two gentlemen here, Alex and Edward, of how they've overcome their barriers and set a goal for themselves to go to work. And that's the type of message that they need to spread out to other youth, because very rarely does a 16, 17, or 18-year-old want to hear something from a 40 or 50-year-old or somebody that's in the bureaucratic system. They want to hear it from somebody that's closer to their age, that's been there and done that. So thank you, gentlemen. Then, let me skip a slide. And these are some of the factors that may influence vocational success. And my belief is it's the relationship that the youth has with their employment specialist and meeting them where they're at and developing a trusting relationship and being able not only to talk about employment, but to talk about other issues that are going on. And then again, why our program works. Our program works because we are person-centered planning. We do meet the person where they're at, and we also provide 24/7 coverage in the form of job coaching if somebody is working any type of variety of shifts, and we've had that happen a lot. So again, you know, the bottom line is a lot of talk is discussed about wellness and recovery, and my feeling is you can't have wellness and recovery without being able to provide employment and or school. Somebody usually wants to go to school to get a better education, to get a better job. Somebody may be working in an entry-level job and want to go back to school to get more education. So that's my conclusion of my presentation. Any questions?
I just wanted you to address a little more about, I think what's interesting is Aiko's program approaches it from the mental health kind of global multi-domains. You approach it from the employment domain, but both of you incorporate the same multiple domains. Talk a little bit about how you network with other programs to provide the mental health and housing and other.
Well, at Caminar, we have our own, we have supported housing, we have supported education, we have a med clinic, we have our own psychiatrist. So it's a one-stop type of agency. And we have a specific youth program, young adult independent living called Yale. So we're trying to move towards more integrated health. So a one-stop program where a youth can have a primary physician as well as having a psychiatrist if needed, and then our employment team can be embedded with the team of case managers and medical treatment and psychiatric treatment, which is very important.
Mike, I have a quick question. Is there like a specific criteria that the program has to follow in order to qualify for the program, or anyone can join?
So anybody that has a barrier to employment is pretty much eligible, and we help navigate the paperwork to get open with the Department of Rehabilitation. And of course, they make the final say-so, but we've never had any real big problems. Yes.
I saw you had a category of other for different jobs that they can get. If a client has a really specific idea of what kind of job they want, say in a corporate environment, would you be able to help them?
Yes. So we don't have a listing of employers that we put people in. Okay, we customize our job development to what the person wants. And we also work with people with higher level master's degrees, people with law degrees that relapse and have an illness, and that's part of the other category. So whatever job somebody is looking for, we will tailor that to their vocational goal.
That's great. Thank you very much.
Hi, do you accept GGRC funding or straight Medi-Cal?
Yes, we're vendors with Golden Gate Regional Center and San Andreas and Far Northern Regional Center. So in Butte County, we provide a lot of services to people with autism, and then we also work with the regional centers, GGRC and SARC, to provide employment services.
So you actually go into Santa Clara County as well?
We're in
San
Santa
Mateo?
Clara County. We're doing a lot of job coaching in Santa Clara County for SARC clients. So to answer your question earlier, yes, we could possibly help you out.
Well, it's just I know a number of people. It's not just, so you will take behaviorally challenged individuals sometimes.
Yes, if it's a referral from SARC or from a regional center and the behavioral issues, if the key is if somebody has a strong desire and motivation to work, that's what we focus on. The rest we can deal with. It may take some time, but that's what we deal with because that's what's key. It's not having their brother or their mother or their father or friend saying, well, you need to go to work, because that's not going to happen. If somebody truly wants to go to work, then we can work with them, and we have success in placing those folks.
And then you mentioned you have a 40-hour, sort of try out different jobs.
Right, so if somebody doesn't...
Less than 40? I mean, or is 40 hour
It's
week?
usually 40 over a 2-week period, because usually the first 3 to 4 days, it's a honeymoon period. Somebody will show up to work, everything's fine and dandy, and then as you get more into it, well, I stubbed my toe, I had an argument with my roommate, so issues come up.
Thank you, Michael.
Excuse me, I just have a question. So these services seem to be outside of San Francisco. How does someone in San Francisco?
We have a program here in San Francisco where we work with folks that have barriers to employment. We work with the Department of Rehabilitation. So we have a co-op program. We work with people with mental health issues, with intellectual disabilities, all types of disabilities, hearing impaired, visually impaired.
Do we go through Caminar?
Yes, the contact information is in the handout on the last slide. You call us up and we'll help you navigate the process.
Thank you.
A question, do you have a partnership with probation?
We don't have a direct partnership probation, but we have worked with a lot of folks with criminal backgrounds.
But how do you get the case management services?
Folks with a criminal background, you mean through probation?
In San Francisco, they have a section which will do case management and help people on probation.
Right, so if anybody has a criminal background and they're interested in working, we will partner.
You will partner with
Of course.
that county? Okay.
Yes.